What happens at Grandma's stays at Grandma's is a model for you and your grandkids. If it's fun, it's fair game. But lately, hip pain has you grimacing more than laughing. And that's a moment you realize life's too short to put off treatment any longer.
The Joint and Spine Center is Cincinnati's leading destination for orthopedic care, with hundreds of joint replacements each year. So when a moment has the power to change the rest of your life, go to the one place with the power to change it for the better. The Christ Hospital Health Network. This changes everything.
The Pound This Podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. This is the Pound This Podcast, episode 598, Headphones and Hearing Loss with Dr. Adam Goodale.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started.
What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This Podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This Podcast. I'm Amanda Valentine. My guest today is Dr. Adam Goodale from the Christ Hospital Health Network. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell me what we're going to specifically talking about, like hearing loss, headphones and stuff like that. Is it a major topic for you? What's your specialty at the Christ Hospital, and kind of what's your day-to-day focus look like?
Yeah, so I'm a general ENT doctor, so cover the whole gamut. I will say the majority, if you had to pick one, we see primarily ear stuff. So a lot of hearing loss related issues, a lot of ear infections, which sometimes are headphone related. So, we do see everything, but it's by far and away probably the most predominant thing that we see.
So tell me a little bit about you. Where are you from? How did you, what's your path to choosing this, being an well, geez, I can't even speak. I'll tell you, describe your job.
I know where you're going.
How did you get here?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Cincinnati. I grew up in Loveland, and then I went to college in Nashville at Vanderbilt and came back to UC. So I went to UC for med school and residency. The appealing thing about ENT is it's a lot of quality of life, lifestyle stuff. So you can things that you feel like you're going to improve people's quality of life. So hearing loss, that you can improve, recurrent sinus infections. It's not overly morbid. Most people go either home same day from surgeries. We do see some cancer, but it's not a huge part of what we do. So it's a good variety. You see kids, you see adults. It's kind of all over the place, which has been nice.
So with the topic of hearing loss, I know that, specifically because this is a health, wellness, fitness podcast of so many people exercise with headphones in. Like, I'm one of those people, if I get to the gym and I don't have headphones, I'll turn back around and get them. Like, I just need to listen to headphones. And especially, I've done a lot of running and going on long runs and cranking the headphones. And I just feel like they kind of work together. Or even if you're not, like if you're going to a CrossFit gym or a boot camp thing, it feels like the music is just cranked and banging in there. Like, how much damage is that doing to all of us?
Yeah, it's even, a lot of the studies are on teenagers because it coincides with screen time and device use. So, some of the studies are that 80% of teens wear headphones for 1 to 3 hours in a day. So it's not even just exercise, that just in general, people are wearing headphones more. And some of it's how portable everything is, that we always have access to podcasts, music, whatnot. So, maybe just a quick overview of kind of hearing, and that will kind of help people understand a little bit better actually how you get hearing damage.
Okay.
So the biggest way that you hear, sound waves come into your ear, they get amplified through your middle ear, your hearing bones, and then they're picked up in your inner ear. And that's really where the damage happens, is in the inner ear. We have these small hair cells that basically vibrate based on the frequency to pick up the sound. The challenge is when those hair cells become damaged, they don't regenerate. And so if you damage them enough over time, you're going to ultimately get hearing loss. Some of the challenges we have probably, like 15,000 inner hair cells, you're not going to notice any actual hearing loss until maybe 10,000 are left. And so the challenge is some people get annual hearing tests and nothing has changed, but it's really the damage is being done. You're just not noticing it. So particularly in kids, they'll listen to loud music and don't notice any hearing changes. Their hearing test is the same, but give it 10 more years and they're going to notice it. So from a health and wellness standpoint, it's really volume dependent. That is the biggest issue. A lot of the science has come from workplaces. So loud environments, and then when do you notice hearing loss? And so it's volume dependent and time dependent. So if you listen to something that's very loud, you should only listen to it for a short period of time. If it's very low volume, you could listen to it for a long period of time. The challenge is knowing what is the right volume and what's, when are you in harm. Apple has done a really good job with generating that awareness. So if on their Apple Health app, if you use your phone to listen to music, so I do that when I'm working out, you can actually go into the Health app and you click on hearing, and it will tell you exactly how loud your music was during that workout.
Oh, I didn't know
And to
that.
know if you're damaging your ear, calibrate to that. That's the challenge, is knowing kind of exactly how loud it is. So in preparation for this, I actually never used this before, went back and looked, and it has all my data for when I work out and how loud it is. And so the key is under 85 decibels, then you're fine. You're actually not causing any damage. When they look at people and they measure the volume that they're listening to music, it's typically around 95 decibels. So people on average are listening to it louder than what your body can withstand from not having hearing damage. And that 95 decibels, you should be able to listen to it for an hour. So a lot of the guidelines have come out saying, listening for 60 minutes. And the kind of the thing they also say is at 60% the max, because that tends to correlate with 95 decibels. So that's the challenge, is especially if you're at the gym and you're working out or you're outside, there's a lot of background noise. And so we're going to turn up our music to overcome the background noise. And so now it's even louder. And so that's the challenge. So some of it's turning it on in a quiet place so it's comfortable, going into the louder place and just kind of keeping it there, not cranking it up. Or if you do crank it up, just don't listen to it for as long.
Now, is there any sort of difference in the damage that can be done versus listening to music versus a conversation like a podcast like this, or if you're doing a Zoom meeting or you're watching like a YouTube channel and just like basically just speaking versus music? Or is it just no matter what it is, it's only the volume?
Yeah, it's really just the volume, which I would say probably music people are going to turn up louder than other things. The headphones definitely play a role as far as how you're listening to it. So over-the-ear headphones tend to be better. It tends to be a lower volume, and it tends to shield the background sound. So like a noise-canceling headphone is great because it's shielding that background sound, so you don't have to turn up the volume to combat that. And it kind of attenuates or decreases the amount of sound that your ear is actually seeing, versus something that's in the ear actually tends to be higher.
Gotcha. Yeah, see, I feel like in my situation, I've had a good mix of both. Like I have the over-the-ear ones now because I've done radio for so long. I have to wear radio or headphones to go on the air. And then growing up as a kid, I would just have because I'm old, my Walkman on all the time. And it was over the ears, just like, crappy 90s headphones. But now, when I work out, it's definitely like the earbuds. And so I feel like myself in a mix of both. And I don't know. I feel like they've both kind of messed up my hearing, but I think that it's just because I've had headphones on since I was a kid, but I guess that a lot of kids have that now too. So, it doesn't seem like there's much hope.
The time is the biggest thing. Is you're on, you're going to be using them for the vast majority of the day. If you use it for an hour, it's probably not a big deal. But using it for 8 hours, then you have to be really conscious of that volume.
So if you don't have an Apple and where you can go into Apple Health and monitor that, is there another way to kind of monitor where your volume is?
I try to research that. With Android, they definitely have apps that you can use that will give you your volume feedback. That's why they've looked at kind of what percentage of your device volume, so 60 to 70% max tends to be correlating with that threshold level that you should use. But again, it depends on what type of hearing device you're using. So there are other things out there, but it's just monitoring it. But Apple that becomes more and more. that's a really nice feature to look and see what are you noticing. They also have apps just for background noise, so if you're, are in a crowded place, even just for listening, the National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety has a really good app that will tell you what's the background noise level in a coffee shop. It's honestly near like 80 decibels. So even being in a coffee shop is actually at that level where you may be getting hearing damage. So it doesn't take as much as you would think to reach that threshold.
So how do you know when you actually have some damage? Because I'm fairly certain that I do. And it's not that it's like a need hearing aids sort of level. It's just kind of like, making people repeat themselves. Especially now that we're all wearing masks. So it's like you have a mask on if you're going to a counter somewhere, or you're talking to a cashier at Kroger or something, then it's, it becomes more difficult to hear. But I'm like, but is this hearing damage on my end, or is it because we're wearing masks and we're muffled? Or is it both?
Yeah, so the mask have definitely played a role. They say it probably drops the decibel about 10 decibels from when you're talking. So people that have a little bit of hearing loss, they're on that threshold, and it certainly makes a difference. And you can't read lips. So we probably read people's lips more than we realize, and now you take that away. So a couple of things as far as knowing if you have damage, some of this, so we talked about like if you have very loud sounds for short durations, take like if you're at a concert and it's really loud for a short duration, if you afterwards, or if you notice that your hearing has been different afterwards, that's a sign that you're getting damage, and that ultimately, you're going to have hearing loss down the road. If it's just trying to assess where you're at cumulatively, a lot of them, I will say, people's spouse or their people they live with are the ones that tend to pick it up more than the person themselves. That seeing if you feel like the people you're around, do I not always catch what people are saying, or does it seem like I'm just not picking up things as well as I should? I'd say that's probably the majority of people we see, and that's how they pick it up. A hearing test is really the best way to know if you have hearing loss or not. There are online hearing tests. They're not perfect, but they're going to give you a good idea. Most of them will calibrate your headphones to the level and see where you're at. Because the challenge, a lot of people we see have just mild hearing loss, where it's not, the point where you need a hearing aid, but you at least should be aware of it. And then when you're in certain environments, you can position yourself to help you. But it's hard to know where you're at. But yeah, so an easy one is just an online test. Otherwise, it's having an audiologist do your hearing test.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've never had one in like a really official capacity, other than somebody I knew personally a few years ago was doing it because she was going to school for that. And she's like, can I come into the workplace and test everybody as part of like her classes, like part of her homework? But I did, and I don't know the accuracy of this test because it wasn't a specific hearing test I did online a couple weeks ago, where it's like, hit the space bar or whatever whenever you stop hearing the noise, and then it like told you what you're hearing, like what age your hearing correlated as. And when I did it, it's like, you have the hearing of a 65-year-old. I'm like, I don't know how accurate that is, but that sucks.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a decline with time for sure. Some of it's just that cumulative damage we talked about. Yeah, so I bet you do have some hearing loss.
And is there any spinning that around? You said that the hairs can't come back or whatever. So at this point, is it just damage control moving forward if you have some hearing loss?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's the biggest thing is protecting your ears. So a lot of it's so we talked about headphone use. Monitoring it, but even running the lawnmower, yard equipment. That's probably the biggest noise exposure for people is yard equipment. So wearing headphones when you're mowing the yard, even though it's not terribly loud, that cumulative damage builds up. Workplace is the other big thing that we'll see. So most, OSHA has kind of mandated hearing protection. Some of it's that we see people, when I worked at the VA, you'd see these vets who were in the war in World War II or something, and there was never even awareness about it. So some of that, the damage has been done. So we're at least at a better state where their awareness is out there. That helps. The challenge when we talked about headphones is like how much use. So there was a study I looked at recently, teenagers, 1 in 5 teens has documented hearing loss, which is 30% higher than 20 years ago. And that's probably just from personal device use that's going up. So, we worry that if a teenager has hearing loss, what's that going to look like in 20 or 30 years? They're really going to struggle.
Yeah, I would imagine gaming probably fits in there too, because you're getting loud explosions and stuff like that. I can't imagine that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the other thing they'll say is like, if you have headphones on, you should be able to hear the people around you. So if somebody's talking to you and you can't hear it, or the contrary to that is the people around you shouldn't be able to hear your music or what you're listening to. If it's really loud and they can pick up everything, then it's probably too loud. So it's really volume control. So
at what point if you feel like there's a problem, would you, come and see a specialist, that I would like come and see you at the hospital whenever I notice that I'm just not hearing everybody around me and I'm like, I need to go talk to a doctor?
Yeah, because, so people with mild hearing loss, you're not going to do anything else other than counsel them, and tell them to avoid loud noises, to monitor their headphone volume. Um, it's a matter of how much it bothers you. So people that are in meetings often or in places where they're struggling to hear what people are saying, and that's really affecting their day-to-day life, then a hearing aid is a good option. And when you cross that threshold for whether a hearing aid makes sense or not is very person dependent. Somebody who works in a quiet place, and if they have a little bit of hearing loss, that's not as big of an issue. Well, then maybe a hearing aid doesn't make sense. But there is a little bit of use it or lose it phenomenon that your ability to understand words and sounds deteriorates with time. And so if you have hearing loss, your brain's not getting that feedback. And so over time, you do get a little bit worsening ability to even just discriminate words. And so that's where, this is something kind of over 5-10 years that you have to kind of address. So if you notice some hearing loss, it's not something you got to rush in and do, but it's something I'd pay attention to. And at some point when it's starting to affect you or affect the people around you, to get a hearing test and see what it looks like.
So on a different topic, but still it's hanging out on the ears here. Like, what are your vibes about like ear candling?
People do them. I can't say I've ever seen like issues because of it.
I mean, does that actually work?
They don't recommend it. Like the National ENT Society doesn't recommend it. I think there's probably a little bit of technique to it. I mean, wax is a challenging issue that we see probably every day. The challenge is, so I mean, the biggest thing is people always harp on Q-tips. Really Q-tips are only an issue if you're pushing wax in constantly and it's becoming an issue, or you're giving yourself ear infections. But we recommend, peroxide drops, or like, vinegar even works really well for breaking up the wax.
Pouring it in your ear?
Yeah, just getting like an eyedropper and putting it in there. It's like a vinegar alcohol solution, works really well. So that often is a better solution than ear candling. Yeah, but
Okay.
definitely people use it. I can't say I've ever seen a huge problem from it.
I mean, I will say it's kind of like almost like with the ear candling thing is almost kind of fits into the category of like, what is it? The like Dr. Pimple Popper or whatever online, where people just really like that. I think people just like the like, ooh, look at all the gunk that came out of my ears. Like, it's just a satisfying, like cleaning out.
Yeah, it's amazing how much wax you'll get out of people's ears sometimes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that's the nice thing when that's their hearing loss, is because they have a bunch of wax, but that's not always the case.
Yeah. Growing up, my mom was very much use the Q-tip to clean your ear. And then as an adult, I heard there were so many negative things against it. So I didn't do that anymore, because then I'm paranoid that I'm going to like jam it in my ear too far. So then how do you know how much, if you're not doing an ear candle thing, or I'm not putting peroxide or vinegar in my ear, and I'm not using Q-tips because I'm not doing any of those things. I mean, could some of my own personal hearing loss just be from earwax buildup because I'm not really doing anything to get it out of my ear? Or is it one of those things that's just better left alone, and if it becomes a problem, then you'll know?
Yeah, so your body naturally clears the wax. Basically, the skin kind of sheds from the eardrum outward, and it pulls the wax out with it. So using a Q-tip on the very outer part of your ear is fine to clear that wax. Amazing enough, the wax doesn't cause hearing loss unless it's completely obstructing the ear canal. So if you have even your ear canal half full of wax, it shouldn't impact your hearing. It's only once it becomes completely packed. So, and most people notice that. I mean, it basically feels like you have an earplug in your ear if it's bad enough that the wax is actually causing it. I mean, it'd be a night and day change.
So on a day-to-day basis, are you seeing just a lot of general ear infections in here in Cincinnati? Because I know I was warned when I first moved to Cincinnati. I moved here from Oregon, and everybody's like, "You're going to get really sick." They're like, "You're going to," even though I grew up in the Midwest, they're like, "Oh, you're going to get Cincinnati sick." I'm like, "What does that mean?" And I was here 1 month, and I had double ear infection and a sinus infection, and it just murdered me. And I was like, "What the heck is happening here? That all of a sudden Cincinnati's giving me ear infections?"
Yeah, so the Cincinnati sinus, it has to do with the Ohio Valley. So we see a lot of allergy issues. And so they tie in with ear issues because it's your eustachian tube in the back of your nose that gets swollen, and that sets you up for an ear infection. So for sure, we see a lot of that. There's a lot of overlap. I'm sure you do a lot of like health and wellness of foods. We see a lot of food allergies. That's probably more of a topic that's come up as far as cross reactivities. So people that have certain allergies are more prone to having food allergies that correspond, which can cause similar type of issues.
Oh, interesting. And that's Cincinnati specific as well?
Not necessarily. It's more just that there's more allergens. So in
Gotcha.
Cincinnati area. Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. So some
will,
people just got to move to the Southwest. That's the
right? Oh man, I will say that it is different how we're just regional that stuff is, because when I lived more West Coast, I lived in Colorado and Oregon, I rarely got sick. And then I came to Cincinnati and I got sick immediately, and I've been sick more often. And it's just kind of like, I guess, being in that valley, like you said, I think it's interesting too, of somebody has never moved out of where they've ever, their location, to know that maybe it's the area that is making more sick. I know when I lived in New York State, I was more sick than I'd ever been anywhere else. And then as soon as I moved to Colorado, I wasn't sick at all. It's crazy how that works.
And it's tough because adults tend to have not as specific allergy symptoms. So little kids, it's the classic runny nose, sneezing, itchy eyes, but adults, it tends to be more vague. So it may be sinus infections or ear fullness or something that's not obvious that it is an allergy.
And I know I'm totally going off the topic of hearing loss here, but with, this being your specialty and these also being COVID symptoms, does this kind of make things a little bit more confusing this year?
So we see people a lot earlier for a cough now than we ever used to, because they just don't want to be in public and they're coughing. The smell stuff we haven't seen quite as much, because the majority of people that have smell loss, that's their presenting symptom, get better. And so we only tend to see them if it's a lingering effect, which it's a classic, viral smell loss. So it's not just COVID specific. We've seen some of it, but not as much as you'd probably expect.
Okay. Now I haven't seen any COVID symptoms that affect the ears at all. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. It's more for us, the smell loss is the biggest thing that we hear about.
Yeah, that seems like a bummer. Where you can't taste all your favorite foods.
It comes back. Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of people, it's just temporary. Yeah.
So for the takeaways for the ear health and hearing loss, like kind of like a quick guide is basically, tell me if I'm correct here, is just watch if you can figure out your decibel level through an app or through Apple. Be mindful of what your decibel level is, and wear protection whenever you're using like lawn equipment or in a time where it's loud, and take an online hearing test. I mean, is that kind of cover the bases there?
Yeah. So it's volume and it's duration. So if you're going to listen to it for a loud or a long period of time, turn the volume down. If it's an hour, you tend to be okay. And
the over the ear headphones versus the
it's probably a little bit better. I think I wear my in the ear. I just find it more comfortable. But the over the ear is probably better. So the one plug I will make is dementia has been tied to hearing loss, and so there's been a lot of stuff in the news that we'll hear about. So that's some of the concern is, the question is, does hearing loss cause dementia, or is dementia, they tend to just be related, but we do think if you're not hearing as well, your brain's not getting as much stimulation, and over time could potentially lead to dementia. So, I mean, it's one, since the social isolation of not hearing, socially not being able to interact with people as well, but then we worry about the mental health of it as well.
Oh, interesting. So I guess that makes it even more important if you notice that you have some hearing loss to get it checked out, so you don't possibly go down that road.
Yeah, and it's like anything where you don't see the impact, for years, and so it's hard to really assess it. So it's just kind of being mindful and creating good habits.
So if somebody has some additional questions for you, maybe about something that they have going on, is there a way to reach out to you to ask you those questions?
Yep. So I'm on the Christ website. They should be able to access us. Our email should be on there. And we're happy to answer any questions that people would have.
Okay, great. I'll put that in the show notes. And this was super helpful. I'm actually going to go into my Apple Health and I'm going to check and see where I'm at right now and kind of move on from there. I think that is so incredibly useful. So Dr. Adam Goodale, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
For info on health coaching and more, go to AmandaValentineBites.com.